I know it can be really frustrating to take the time to write an RFI response only to have that thing go into the black hole where government buyers are not following back up with you, right? We also call it ghosting, right? And it's crazy. I'm stumbling over my words because I feel your frustration. I get really frustrated. It does suck that you take the time to write a response to a federal buyer, contracting officer, maybe even the program office is really engaged in that thing, and they don't respond, right? That can be bad. It's even worse if you're writing these RFI responses / sources sought responses, and frequently they're not getting back to you, or maybe always you never hear back from them. That thing really sucks, but it doesn't have to happen that way. Your RFIs are designed, or your RFI responses, they're not destined to go in a black hole. They're destined to have this engagement with the federal buyer. You should be able to expect responses back. And really, that's the whole reason they're doing sources sought and the RFIs. We sometimes mix them together, by the way, just if you're newer to this game. RFI stands for request for information, and sources sought is sources sought. One is generally more about talking about the technical scope or the scope of the work. The sources sought is more about trying to find out what sources are out there that could serve the government's need. We just wrap them together sometimes into RFI because there is no consistency across the government. But there is also no conspiracy. The government really does want to talk with you. Federal buyers really do want to talk with you. This is why they're putting it out there, right? They're putting an RFI or a sources sought out to engage industry. If you're going into the black hole, well, it's no good to them or you. And I want you to feel confidence that there's something you can do about that. And that's what we're going to dive into today, avoiding that RFI black hole problem. By the way, if you like RFIs and you see the value and you just want to get more engagement with the agency or the federal buyer, put RFIs rock into the chat. Let me know you believe in them and you're just trying to get the government to kind of respond to you. That's what we're here to do today. We're not here to complain about the government not responding. We're trying to figure out how do we get them to respond for their benefit and for yours. And that's what we're going to be diving into. So I'm going to break down today's training into 3 main sections, right? I got 4 bullets, but 3 main sections. And all of this is around how do you get RFIs responses to get some response from the government? How do you stop them from going into the black hole, et cetera? They shouldn't have to do that. I've written lots of RFIs in my career. And so I want to give you tips about what you can do before you even write the RFI response. You know that there's an RFI out there. And so I want to talk to you about what you can do before the RFI response. And I'll give you a little spoiler here. One of the main things is find people who can help you within the agency or within the government. And then the other is what questions you can ask the government that really help decrease the likelihood that you'll go into a black hole once you do send a response. So that's first thing. Second thing I'm going to talk about is what you can do within the response that will encourage you to be able to, or your response to get some. I struggle over this thing. I'm trying to get your response to get a response. So I'm going back and forth. But the idea is, what can you do when you're writing that RFI response? What can you do in there to prevent it from going into the black hole, to encourage the government to respond to you? And then lastly, I'm going to talk to you about is what can you do after you submit the RFI? How do you continue to follow up? What are the activities you do that not only that you should do just generally in an RFI after you follow up, after you submit an RFI response, but also what can you do in that follow-up after you submit it that will decrease the chances that you just go into a black hole of no response. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to rock and roll on that. I got a lot of tips, so today's going to be a fire hose day. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonnell. I want to welcome you to my federal sales training where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years in the federal market as a government contractor after I got out of the Army. And since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting, RFI responding is not a secret. There's no secret to it. It's just a process. And so I say government contracting is not a secret. It's a process. When you follow the process A to Z, you're going to have repeatable, predictable results. That's what I want for you. You should be able to begin to see more predictable results from your RFI efforts, your RFI response efforts. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to our newsletter. You can see in here, let me turn my camera off for 1 second. In the newsletter, you can see we've got 21,000 subscribers in there. And the reason we keep growing week after week is because we put out really good content like that SOS International yesterday. We put out DHS content talking about how do you have a meeting, how do you get a meeting with them, and they're really open to it. Okay, I go fast even for me sometimes, so don't worry, you can slow it down to the next level. So let's get started talking about, and I think I'm going to put myself in a corner for 1 second just so we see these bigger slides. Before the RFI responses due, you've got all sorts of things you can do to increase your likelihood that the government's going to respond to you. I want to give you these tips. These tips are not based on what the contracting officer says to me. These are based on my 30 years of experience as a sales guy. How do I get in the door? How do I get the customer to respond to me? How do I get them to think the way I want them to think, right? I'm not going to bamboozle the government into buying what I want to do, but I need to guide them through the sales life cycle, which is different than the acquisition life cycle. And that's why I talk about finding people early on the RFI. So if I was your boss and you're doing sales in the company, I would be looking for you to show me in the sales pipeline that you've got these people tracked. So the first one is the small business specialist. So every agency has a small business specialist. Most of them are full-time, some of them part-time, but all of them have them. These are people who are basically helping you get in and navigate their agency. So when you have an RFI and you know it's with this agency, go find out who the small business specialist is. If you can't find them, escalate up to the OSDBU. They call it something different depending on whether you're in military or civilian, but basically OSDBU is Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization. And you can throw away the D because really it's Office of Small Business Utilization. They help all small businesses. But you want to find that person. You're going to be engaging with them as you go forward on the RFI, letting them know that you're going after it. The second one, make sure you identify the contracting officer. Don't write a response if you don't know who the contracting officer is. Otherwise, it's kind of like just going into an abyss. You literally are writing a response and throwing it to a black hole instead of throwing it to a contracting officer and then it slides to the black hole. You know, if you throw it to a contracting officer, it slows to a black hole, I can help prevent that. But if all you're doing is throwing it over the wall without knowing who's on the other side, then you're not going to have really any luck on getting responses. And so identify the contracting officer. The third one is identify the program office and the key leaders within that program office. If I'm writing a response and it's SharePoint related and I'm writing to NAVWAR, for example, Naval Information Warfare Systems Command or something in the Navy, right? Or PEO Digital, I can go down and find that office. There's ways to go in. I've done all sorts of training about how do you sit there and follow that thread through, but you identify the program office and the key leaders in there. This enables you to research them, follow up and ask them questions, etc. That's, by the way, the reason you want to find all these people is you want to be able to get their help, get your questions answered, and get on their radar ahead of them getting your response for the RFI. So the fourth one here is identify the GSA Customer Service Director, and this is CSD. I did 3 days of training this past week here with Andy Kirkpatrick from GSA, and he was talking about how CSDs, the Customer Service Directors, can enable us when we've got an opportunity we're trying to pursue. Their job, and I'm paraphrasing this, their job is basically to help us get in the door and convince the customer to go on our contract vehicle. And so these people, you might be able to reach out when there's a specific RFI or opportunity that you're trying to pursue. You can reach out to the GSA CSDs, and they might be able to tell you about who that contracting officer is. They might be able to get you in the door. By the way, I don't see chats as we go forward, so I will come back, and I do engage in the chat, but I move really fast. But ask questions. I'll come back if somebody else is not answering it. Okay, so I said GSA. Now, identify the SBA, and this is more for, by the way, the GSA Customer Service Director, for the most part, that's when you have a contract vehicle and you're going after an opportunity and you want to push it to GSA. That's what those guys are motivated by. The CSDs are motivated to try to get an opportunity put on GSA's contract vehicle. And so if you've got an opportunity and you've got the schedule, they'll help you. If you don't know what I'm talking about, they're just not for you. The next one is the SBA Business Opportunity Specialist. These people are primarily for 8A small businesses. The bulk of their responsibility is just the administration of the 8A program and the 8A businesses that are within their region. But they also will talk to small businesses outside of 8A, so you can reach out to them. But these people can be advocates. They can open doors. They can help drive things. They can help maybe keep it from going into the black hole, right? They're not going to help you win it. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. It's more about how do you stop your response from going into the black hole at an agency. And then the last one is, and this is a new one I just really learned about this week in much more detail, and you can go watch that video, but identify other teaming partners. So we call them competimates. Some days you're competitors, someday you're a teammate, so competimmate. Identify competimates who are also on GSA mass, maybe even the same vehicle as you, and you can create this thing called a contractors teaming agreement. And when you do, you can bring more power to that opportunity when you're going into that agency. And so what I'm recommending is, like, if you're looking at this opportunity, especially if it's a fairly big one, it begins to get bigger than $1 million or 5 or 10 million. Finding a teammate's never a bad thing. And if you come together, sometimes you're more attractive to that agency buyer. And I'll also tell you why or how you can kind of use that. But before you write an RFI response, take the time to do this. This should be like a 1-2 hour task. If you struggle with the how, just reach out and let me know in a DM. But before you do, make sure you go and look in my training, because every one of these, I've got training, free training right here on LinkedIn and in YouTube on how to do this, how to go out and find these people. But all of these people can be advocates for you as you're trying to write an RFI response, as you're trying to pursue an opportunity with the government. Okay, so that's the people you want to identify and get ready to talk to. But what can you ask them? I'm going to bounce around. So the more specific those people are, the more you're just trying to get help and visibility. But the first thing I wanted to give is my all-time favorite tip for engaging a contract officer in particular, right? I like to find mistakes inside of the document, that RFI. First off, most people don't even read it enough to identify the mistake. But if you find a mistake, and I'm not talking about, a missing period or something, I'm talking about something where it's a little confusing, there's something missing there. If you can find that as soon as possible, you can reach out to the KO and say, by the way, sorry, really quickly, CO and KO stands for contracting officer. In the civilian side, we call them COs, contracting officer. And in the military, we call them KOs because CO stands for commanding officer. So I go back and forth between CO and KO. But finding a mistake and calling and reaching out to the KO, you can go, hey, Jane, I was looking at the RFI. We really want to respond. But I noticed in here, it says there's 5 pages. And over here, it says there can be 5,000 pages, whatever, right? If there's something like that that enables you to get in and have that dialogue, they're going to appreciate it. I've been doing this for years and years, and you're always very polite. And hey, I hope I'm not stepping outside my boundaries or something. I'm not trying to judge you. I'm just saying this could be a confusion in the responses. I just want to let you know. Like a NAICS code missing a number, right? There's only 5 numbers instead of 6. When you reach out like that, no one else is doing that. So now you've begun to engage them. When you send a response later, Jane's going to remember you. Doesn't mean she's going to award the contract to you or anything, but she might respond to you and say, hey, I got it. Why don't we come in and talk? Or if you then follow up and say, I want to talk, she'll have remembered you from this engagement where, you saved her some headaches later where people responded and maybe she has to go back and have them all respond again, et cetera. All right. So the second question that second thing I'm recommending you do is a series of questions you can reach out. These are all just suggestions. And when I'm doing it with my customers, when I do it myself, I'm going to sit there and come up with more questions depending on the specific RFI. But the second question I have here, second bullet is this a recompete? If I don't know that answer yet, then I can reach out and ask, is this a recompete? Can I get the old ID? So this new RFI, new source of SOT is coming out. And if it's a recompete or a consolidated contract, 2 contracts coming together, if it is one of those, then I want the old ID so I can do my research. I don't want you to do the research for me, Jane. Could I just get the old ID on this if it's a recompete so I can go do my research on FPDS, et cetera? And so sometimes it says it in the documentation, but really I read a ton of these and most times it does not tell you right away, right? It says we have a requirement. Great. Has this requirement been there already or is it a new requirement? Something simple like that could have helped us. That's a great question to ask. Another one is, and this one's really good because it is a type of question that you get in and you get out. You when you're talking to buyers and you're trying to just really you're just trying to engage them and become memorable to them in a positive way. But reaching out and saying, hey, Jane, I was just trying to find out who the small business specialist is for this opportunity. And if not specifically this opportunity for your contracting office. I'm not asking about the opportunity. Even if they say no questions allowed in the RFI thing, first off, even if they write that, I don't care. It's market research. I'm going to ask questions. That's my job as a salesperson, is to ask questions. In the RFP, fair enough, no questions. But in the RFI, that's market research. The whole point of it is to engage industry. But even if it says no questions, this is a question that you can ask that isn't a question they're talking about don't asking or not asking, right? So ask who the small business specialist is. You want that as a way to engage with KO, but you also want it so you can follow up with the small business specialist and ask for their help as you try to respond and serve their agency need. Another question I like to ask is, can we get an extension? I'm a big fan of that question. Just ask it, especially if you need time and it's more involved. They'll say yes or no. Fair enough. Thanks a lot, Jane. I was just asking. Right? So, and when I ask for an extension, by the way, I never ask for an extension of 1 or 2 days. I always go, hey, if it's due Wednesday, can we extend this to next Wednesday? Right? Just ask. All they can say is no. The worst they could say is no. Can we get the previous PWS? Goes with, is this a recompete? Are you open? This is a question I'm going to start asking, but it's a really legitimate question. It's similar to, are you open to setting this aside to HubZone? I'm going to ask, are you open to CTAs coming in? Many of these agency contract officers have no clue what the GSA CTA is. And this is the cool thing. Remember I said that CDC, that customer service director or whatever from GSA, when you engage with them and tell them you're trying to push this to your GSA vehicle or to a couple of GSA partners, then they'll go in and they can educate that contracting officer on what a CTA is. They can introduce that contracting officer to other contracting officers in that agency who know about it. This is the thing you've got to keep in mind about contracting officers. They're not perfect. There is a bell curve of quality in there. And I'm not judging them. There's a bell curve of quality in salespeople. Right? So some of us are very knowledgeable and great, and some of us aren't. There's a bell curve on how much I know about government contracting. I'm not that strong about helping you price your stuff. I'm very good at pricing my stuff. But there's people out there who are experts at pricing, and they can come into any type of service, et cetera, and be able to talk about that pricing. Okay, so the last thing I just want to say on this one, before the RFI, it's really important you abandon RFIs or RFPs the minute you discover that you're rationalizing them being in your pipeline. If they're not in your core competency, don't leave them in there. Okay, so let's talk about what you're doing in the RFI. And I got to pick up my speed here a little bit. When I'm writing an RFI, the most important thing is write an RFI to win. And this goes to the third bullet as well. Give them a reason to follow up. And so what I mean by writing to win is write that RFI response like it's an RFP, like you're trying to beat your competitors. You're trying to write a clear, compliant, compelling, convincing proposal to them. Go for the win in the RFI and source this on. When you write at that level, you are differentiating yourself from all those people who write the bare minimum. If you're on GSA schedule, you know that in eBuy, a lot of times they just come out and they say, answer these questions. I head straight down and write 25 pages. And people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm trying to beat you. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give the government a reason to, if not buy from me directly through the market research phase, then to bring me in to talk. Tell me about what you're talking about here, Neil, in the RFI. This was really interesting. We want to explore it. But if somebody else just answers the basic questions but doesn't try to go for the win, they're not going to impress the federal buyer, right? They're not going to unimpress them or anything. You want to impress, so write for the win. And then I put here, remember that they need you. We small businesses, as we're coming in, we're like, oh, thank you for giving me a contract, et cetera. No, there's this thing about speakers. We're taught never thank the audience at the end. The audience should be thanking me. And I say this very humbly, but I'm delivering this information, right? You would thank me. That's how I want you to think about with your federal buyers. They have a need. You have the solution. You don't want to be arrogant about it, right? But you do want to remember that they need you. We call this win-win, right? So don't don't make it lose-win where they win and you lose. And so when you remember that they need you, you really understand you're in a partnership with them. It's just starting, but you can move forward. Okay, some other ones really quickly. Inside the RFI, ask for one set aside. I have a customer who's an 8A and a woman-owned small business. When they write a response, I'm encouraging them to just say set aside to 8A, right? If they want to go woman-owned small business or something, they can. Or excuse me, if the agency wants to go woman-owned small business, in your response, it says all your tags. But when you ask for a set aside, do one. If you say two, then it's like a husband and wife in a house voting Republican and Democrat. You just kind of canceled it out, right? Don't cancel out your set aside vote. Just vote once. Not to get political. And then the other, going with that, right? Ask for your contract vehicle to be used. Don't be wishy-washy. This NAICS code, this contract vehicle. If you're using a contract vehicle like GSA, you can go back to those CSDs. The last one, or second to last one, is ask for a receipt. This one's really important to do it both in the email response, but also put it in your opening letter or something. Please send me a receipt that you got this. We'd love to have an engagement. But when you ask for that, you're getting some feedback, which might have a signature line, et cetera, and give you information you haven't got. And then the last tip I have here is make sure you copy the small business specialist. And don't forward the email to them after the fact. You want the KO to get the response from you with somebody in their agency kind of doing a little bit of accountability or oversight. Then when you follow up to the small business specialist, they're able to go, oh, yeah, I was tracking on that. Let me call Jane and see what's going on. Okay, so here's what you do on after submitting. And I apologize, I'm going pretty fast, but you can take a screenshot. The first thing is, if you have a GSA schedule, forward this opportunity response to the GSA CSD and tell them you'd like to have a meeting and see if you can't push that to the schedule. They would love to do that if they can push an opportunity to the schedule. If you have eBuy, make sure you watch when you submit a response in eBuy, watch for the response back from the government, communicating with GSA and you to say, hey, we got it, we received it, because that tends to be when they're sending other points of contact. It usually is like the KO or the contracting specialist. And hopefully you got it already, but if you didn't, here you can have it. I put out a couple of tips, right? Definitely find them on LinkedIn. Create content that they might value. Hey, I just sent you this RFI response. 2 weeks later, you say, hey, here's something else related to that data analytics need that you have that you might value. And you can send it to the contracting officer who might forward it to the program office. You can continue that dialogue. And then especially when you're providing them value, right? You're just sending it. This might be interesting. And then I wrote here, follow up 50 times, right? Or don't bother writing. What's the point of writing an RFI response if you're not going to follow up, if you don't want to win it? You wrote it because you want to win it, right? So get out there and follow up 50 times. That's like the minimum. You don't want to be a pest. I got all sorts of training on how to follow up politely, the 30-day process of following up, and you go phone call, email, phone call, but follow up. And last tip after you submit it is make sure that you start doing capture. If you're not familiar with this, federal sales, we have business development capture. Capture is when you have a single opportunity and you start pursuing it and shaping it to win. Start doing that on the RFI. Don't write a response and wait till they get back to you. You wrote it because you want to win it. Start capturing it right now. Okay, I know I'm flying here really fast. Here's what I want you to remember from today's training. First off, most important thing, there is no conspiracy with the contracting officers, federal buyers. If they're not getting back to you, they're disorganized. I say this all the time. There's people who want to work with me, pay me, and I don't get back to them. And I want to work with them. I'm disorganized sometimes, right? Just cut us some slack. And most importantly, then you will realize that they do want to talk with you. You just got to follow up. Remember to identify, when you get an RFI, identify all those right people who can help you. Every single RFI that you have. Otherwise, don't respond. If you're not going to find those people, what's the point of even responding? And then the last thing is just relentlessly professionally follow up. Don't give up. Just because they're not getting back does not mean the answer is not no. Even when they say, oh, we're still thinking about the acquisition. Good. I'm going to still be part of that dialogue. It's important for you to be pursuing that. Okay. So, hey, really quickly, if you're interested in accelerating your path into federal agencies, getting in there further with these RFIs, et cetera, but we have a BD Accelerator workshop for companies generally about 2 million plus because there is a price tag to it. Just put workshop in the chat if you're interested in learning more about that. But it is 12:30. I like ending on time. So just remember this one last thing. Government contracting, it is not a secret. It's just a process. I will see you in the next training.